Welcome to the Catholic Community Scripture Study, held at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church in Jackson, Michigan. I will be your host, Todd Gale, as we walk our way through the book of Genesis, a line-by-line study of the first book of the sacred scriptures. Hello, my friends. Grace and peace be with you all as we pick up with Genesis. Some of the earliest scrolls ever found have some of the verses in chapter 32 just a little bit different. They're a little bit out of order, so just pay attention in case your chapter may be like one verse off. That's just because of some earlier scrolls that have been found, and it just gets translated a little differently. But what we're about to look at is Jacob wrestling with an angel, or is it God, or is it a man? This does not come with an easy interpretation. It's said that this chapter holds the key to understanding Jewish identity in the interior life for Jews and for Christians alike. We're in Genesis 32. Laban has just kissed his grandchildren and daughters and blessed them. Laban left to return home as Jacob and his family makes their way back to the promised land. And Jacob identifies the site where he first steps back into this promised land as God's camp. And he names the place Mahanaim. Mahanaim means two camps. Probably sort of like Bethel. Bethel was the meeting place of heaven and earth. This is a camp of men and of angels. And it's not as if the angels had just joined Jacob. They probably have been with him this entire time. But now Jacob can see the angels with him. And it's providing great encouragement. I'm convinced that the angels have been with him all along, just as angels are around us all along. Now, for the last 20 plus years, Jacob had left his home when his brother Esau, the big red hairy one, threatened to kill him for stealing his blessing. Jacob knows he cannot avoid Esau forever, so he sends messengers ahead as he's getting closer to home to see where Esau is, and the messenger comes back and he finds out that indeed Esau is coming. And the messenger is told to say, "My lord Esau, from your servant Jacob." And he's got oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female shepherd or servants. And Jacob isn't boasting. He's trying to let Esau know that he comes with a peace offering. He comes with a gift. And when the messenger returns, Jacob heard the news that made him very afraid. Esau has an army of 400 men marching towards Jacob. This looks like war. There's no way around it. So Jacob's completely distracted, completely afraid, very distressed, and he divides his entourage into two companies, which is kind of an ironic play on Mahanaim, which means the two camps. We're going to divide in two. So one way or another, at least half of the family is going to survive. Now, on one hand, God is showing Jacob, don't be afraid because he's got all these angels on his side. And on the other hand, Jacob is resulting to using his human wisdom once again. He's relying on his usual schemes. And then in verse 9, Jacob begins to pray. This prayer is almost familiar. It's almost like an Old Testament version of a New Testament prayer. Instead of "Our Father who art in heaven," he says, "The God of my Father who is in heaven." And, "O Lord," he says, "O Lord who said to me, return to your country." So Jacob is quoting from God's words, right? He says, "I'm not worthy of the least of these mercies." Jacob has humility and thanksgiving, and he begs the Lord, deliver me. I beg you, Lord, deliver me. Deliver me from evil. This is sort of like the Old Testament version of the Our Father, in a sense. The prayer is showing us that Jacob is changing. This prayer has reliance on God, trust in God, praise of God, and it's not as self centered as Jacob has been so far in our story. But when all else fails, pray. And as soon as he finished praying, he doesn't fall into despair. Instead, he divides the camp even more than just two. It looks like into three, as many as five or even seven different groups. And notice the passages ahead that we start reading. We're picking up in around verse 21. Notice how many times the word face appears, including in the name of where he names this place, Peniel, which is the face of God. Look at how many times face shows up. And what Jacob does is he sends wave after wave, drove after drove of goats and camels and rams, and they're going to go ahead of him to meet Esau, and they say, "These are gifts from your servant Jacob." And then Jacob says, "I may appease him with a present that goes before me, and afterwards I shall see his face, and perhaps he will accept me." It looks like Jacob is trying to reverse the blessing that he stole, right? He is giving to his brother the fatness of the earth, plenty of food, others bowing down. Whoever is blessed, whoever is cursed is cursed. That's what the blessing was that he wrestled from his brother. Then in verse 22 and 23, he took them all, he sent them over the river, over the ford. The mention of the Yabak gives us another identifiable place name. The Yabak is one of the four major eastern tributaries that feeds into the Jordan River. It's on the east side of the Jordan, halfway between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. So today this river is called, in Arabic, it's called the Blue River. And then this is so weird. This is so weird. This is called one of the most enigmatic sentences in all of the Bible. That means it's difficult to interpret. It's mysterious. It's downright weird. Jacob wrestles with an unknown man all night long. Now, try to read this as if you've never read this before, as if you don't know what's next. Like, only read what it says. Jacob has sent many, many gifts toward Esau. He hopes Esau is going to receive this as a peace offering. And he's waiting for his brother. He's afraid that his brother is ready for battle. And then Jacob is left alone, and a man wrestles with him till the break of day. The first thing you might think is that this man is Esau. He shows up alone to have face-to-face, hand-to-hand combat with Jacob. 20 years ago, Jacob was a very different man. He was alone on his way toward and God revealed a stairway to heaven. Well, 20 years later, Jacob is strong and tough and determined. Maybe he's a little bit jaded. And he's on his way back to the Holy Land. Again, he is alone. And again, he has an encounter with God. What he's trying to do with all these gifts he's sending to to Esau, he's trying to undo what he did 20 years ago. But this man shows up and they wrestle for hours. Have you ever done that? One of our gentlemen said that a wrestling match in high school, that they had 3 matches and they were all of 3 minutes long, right? He's wrestling all night long. Jacob has gotten very strong and he's learned endurance. The strange man says, "Let me go, for the day breaks." And Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Why is this strange man concerned about the sun coming up? Maybe because when the sun comes up, Jacob can see him plainly. The light will be on him. He'll be exposed. Maybe this strange man is a vampire or a werewolf. But when the man saw that he did not prevail, He did not win over Jacob. He did not defeat Jacob. He touched the hollow of his thigh, and he basically pulls his leg out of joint. Now, catch this. The wrestling man is not defeated by Jacob. He has not won, but he has not lost. And so he strikes Jacob's upper thigh. Is this like a wrestling move? Does he punch the upper thigh? Was it some sort of supernatural touch? But what exactly does this mean, the hollow of the thigh? Well, according to Saint Google, it's the long middle part of your femur called the femoral shaft. And the femoral shaft supports the body weight and it forms the thigh structure. The hollow portion of the bone is about 1.5 inches thick and has a rounded shape on both ends. So this is where the ball and socket goes in the hip, right? Maybe this is to remind Jacob with every step that he's about to take for the rest of his life. Maybe it's to remind him with every step that he is limited in his own power and he is totally dependent on God. Basically, what happens is he gets his hip out of place. When Jacob was a baby, he took his brother by the heel in the womb. He tried to wrestle Esau. He wrestled Esau throughout their growing years, growing up, and he wrestled a blessing away from Esau. Well, now if this is Esau that he's wrestling with, not only is Jacob still wrestling with his brother, but now he demands a blessing from his brother. What's going on here? There's so many links back to that fateful day when Jacob stole the blessing from his brother after dressing up like him. Add to the wrestling and the blessing and all of that, the fact this is in the middle of the night. Jacob cannot see, and he's demanding a blessing. 20-some years ago, Isaac, his father, was old. He could not see, and he was tricked out of a blessing. It's kind of like things are unwinding. It's like things are being undone. Now, when you read this, read closely all the Proverbs. There's a lot of he, and he. Make sure you know which is Jacob and which is the man. And I want you to notice something. Jacob didn't wrestle with the man. The man wrestled with him. The stranger started this fight. He came to Jacob. And this is where it gets so weird. As the following verses show, the rest of Scripture interprets this scene for us. This was no mere man. He was not wrestling Esau. The text calls him a man. The Hebrew word is ish. Ish, not Adam, but ish. Here it says Ish is wrestling with him, the man. But later on in the prophet Hosea, Hosea says, in the womb, Jacob took his brother by the heel, and in his manhood he strove with God. And the very next verse says, he strove with the angel and prevailed. Wait a minute, is this God or is this an angel? Or is this Ish? Or is it all three? For some of the ancient Jews, they thought this was the guardian angel of Esau. Well, Jacob, later on, he has no doubt. Later on, we'll read that Jacob understood. He saw God face to face. His life was spared even though he was wrestling with God himself. And if this is God, God started the fight. God wanted to wrestle with Jacob. And Jacob didn't come out wanting anything from God. God wanted something from him. God wanted all of Jacob's proud self-reliance, his scheming, and God took it by force if necessary. Now compare and contrast this scene with the grandfather, Abraham. Abraham also saw God face to face. He spoke with God. He had an encounter with God. And God came to Abraham, and in a sense, God wanted to wrestle with Abraham too. He wanted to wrestle with his heart when God said to Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your only son, Isaac, whom you love. But Abraham didn't fight. He went along. He submits to God's will right off the bat. There's no wrestling with Abraham. Jacob, however, is very different from Grandpa Abe in many, many ways. He's not going to give in without a fight. And this fight lasts all night. The dark night. The dark night with our battle with God. It's a time in our life for all of us when we wrestle through our attachments, our connections with the world. We wrestle with our own ego and our own will and our own pride. We wrestle with the sin in our lives. St. John of the Cross and his good friend St. Teresa of Avila, they call this wrestling match the dark night of the soul, or at least something similar to this. Every soul is going to go through some sort of battle like this. If you're going to walk deeply with God, if you're going to be holy, you have to go through this battle. God initiates it. God brings it to us. And here's the thing. Jacob thought his real enemy was Esau, that his real enemy is somebody outside of him. But then he's wrestling with God. Well, this strange man, surely if it's God, God is not an enemy. So I'm so confused if he's wrestling with God and God is not our enemy. Like, what's going on here? Who is Jacob fighting? He's fighting himself. Jacob is the real enemy within Jacob. Doesn't it feel like that ourselves when we fight with God, when we wrestle with God? When we don't like things that are going on and we say, why us? And we try to do things our own way. It feels like God is against us. It feels like God is contrary. It feels like God is fighting. Oh, but God is not really fighting against us. Oh, God is fighting for us. God is fighting through us. The real enemy is ourself. The old self, fighting and wrestling for the new self to come out. It's more like God and the Holy Spirit are trying to make us more and more like Jesus. And our sinful self resists and fights and wrestles. Every one of us, we have these small battles every single day. Every decision we make, every moral choice. Do I do A or B? Like, those are little battles. But once in a while in our lives, we come to a place when we have a major wrestling match within ourselves, a major wrestling match with God. And many people give up. Just give up. The fight's too hard. They don't want to lose the things that they're fighting against. But some people are like Jacob, and they refuse to stop, and they fight against sin until they come out on the other side as a changed person. So just to clarify, Jacob wrestled with God, but he was in the form of man. God in the form of man. The God who can change his name. The God-man who wants to make us better and stronger through a... Now here's where it gets really cool. This word used for wrestled here in Hebrew, it's a very mysterious verb in biblical Hebrew. It only appears 2 times in the entire Bible. Here in verse 24 and in verse 25. This verb wrestled, it's something like a back to wrestle. And the root, I'm told by rabbis, the root is connected to a word that means dust. I really want you to think about this, like rolling in the dust or being pounded into the dust. So one could say this man, God, came to Jacob to return to the dust. Maybe to make a connection of where Jacob first came from, the dust of the earth. Maybe It's a strong echo of God forming man, and perhaps what he's doing now, God is remaking, reformulating, making anew the new man who was Jacob. Is it possible the strange verb is really saying that the strange God man was making Jacob into someone different? The result of this is a new creation. This just makes my head explode. This is like really great. And this man God says in verse 27, you shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel. Wait a minute, if this is Esau, Esau doesn't have the authority to rename his brother. Who renames people in the Bible? God. Right? And the meaning of the name Israel, I mean, this is loaded. This is not simple. It's not straightforward. There are nuances and facets with deep theological significance. You want to dive into this? We like to do this, right? We like to do this. Well, for sure, the name Israel, right? The last part of the name, El, is God. We know that for sure. El is God. The name Israel is a compound of two words, and scholars disagree on what that first word is, the root. It could be the root verb shara, meaning to fight or to struggle, and it can mean to rule. So fight with God or struggle or rule with God. So Israel could mean he who struggles with God, he who rules with God. That's what most commentaries say. They kind of leave it at that. But there's more to it. This root of the word Israel could come from shar, which means chief or ruler. The feminine form of that word is Sarah. Sarah, if you remember, is the name of Jacob's great grandmother, right? Abraham's wife. Sarah means princess, noble lady, right? Princess. From Sarah, which is connected to Sar, which means, or Shar, which means chief or ruler. So Israel may be, he will be a prince with God. He will rule with God. Still, other scholars think it comes from the verb yashar. Yashar meaning to be upright, to stand, to be level. So maybe Israel is to be upright with God, straight like God. There's a large group of Jewish scholars who think differently. They think the root of the word for Israel has something to do, I can't even begin to pronounce it, something to do with a word that means liquid or shifting or something that contains liquid. So Israel could mean he retains God, or something slightly more elaborate, like he has become a receptacle in which God can be received. Sort of like a chalice or a cup. This title seems to point very clearly to Jesus, whose humanity is contained, right? His humanity contains the divinity of God, or vice versa, however you want to say it. So Israel may mean one who wrestles with God, one who struggles with God, one who prevails, a prince of God, upright like God, a retainer of God. So which of these is correct? Yes, all of them. The English language just fails to describe in a precise way what Hebrew says. It's an awesome name. But here's what's interesting. When Jacob gets his name changed to Israel, he's not always called Israel from now on. Back in the past, when his grandfather Abram had his name changed to Abraham, Abram is never called Abram again. He's always called Abraham. Jacob, however, will still be called Jacob twice as often as he's called Israel. Apparently, there's an awful lot of the old Jacob left in this man. And that's really important for us to see. You might be a new person. You might have fought against sin. You might have won. But there are still times in our life when the old man of sin might pop up every now and again and bring you back to being a deceiver. Isn't that just like our lives? Seldom is this battle one and done. We have a total, complete transformation and we never fall again. That's not very common that happens. The angel says, you have struggled with God and have prevailed. He didn't give up. He didn't surrender. He went all the way to the end. He came out not surrendered, not dead. He came out changed. And then the stranger says, why did you ask me my name? Why do you want to know my name? The stranger figures maybe Jacob already knows his name. And he never answers. The strange man has a face, but not a name. And he wrestles with Jacob face to face, but never gives his name. The word face is panim. Panim in Hebrew. It's so strange. Jacob's word about Esau very earlier on, he was all excited because he said, I shall see his face, his panim. And a little later, he's going to say to Esau, to see your panim is like seeing the panim of God. To see your face is like seeing the face of God. So he calls this place Peniel, saying it is because I saw God face to face. Right? Panim El, Peniel. Well, we Christians like to see this as Jesus. This man, God, who sees us face to face, who wrestles with us. Remember how Melchizedek was a type of Jesus? In fact, I think he was a pre-incarnated Jesus. He was like the Son of God in another body before he ever became Jesus. And he showed up as Melchizedek. This same Son of God shows up as the angel of the Lord with the 3 visitors with Abraham. Remember back when we talked about that? I think these are both manifestations of Jesus. And here, Jacob wrestling with an unnamed man. He demands a blessing. The man says he's wrestled with God and men. Who else is God and men? Jesus. Jesus wrestled with one person here. Who is it that is God and man? Such an interesting character. And Jacob, wow, talk about an interesting character. He is becoming a man of faith. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote, it is as if the man said to him, in the past you struggled to be Esau. Well, in the future you will struggle not to be Esau, you will struggle to be yourself. In the past you held on to Esau's heel. In the future you will hold on to God, and you will not let go of him, and he will not let go of you. Now, let go of Esau so you can be free to hold on to God. And Jacob has very careful preparations as he gets ready to meet his brother. We're in Genesis 33 now. We've mentioned before, whenever you read, he lifted his eyes. That's like eyes aloft, eyes lifted to heaven. There's a godly thing about to happen. And so Jacob divides all of his company into a couple different groups this time. This does not seem very kind. This does not seem very sweet. This seems like the old Jacob. He has Leah and her kiddos in the middle, the concubines and their kids in the first of the line, and Rachel and the favorite son Joseph in the back with Jacob. So he's basically offering, the chance for Esau to do battle with the first wave and get rid of his least favorite wives and children. Isn't that horrible? It's just terrible. And he crosses over before them. He sees Esau. He bows himself to the ground 7 times. And Jacob has already sent over the gifts. He showed he didn't want anything materially from Esau. And now by bowing down to him, he's showing that he's submitting to his brother. And Esau ran to meet Jacob. You could just see this going in slow motion. He is running forward, and you see, you could just see slow motion. He's screaming, the knife is drawn. No, it's not like that at all. He runs to meet Jacob, and he falls on his neck, and he kisses him, and he loves his brother. Jacob didn't know that God was doing a work in Esau just as he was doing a work in Jacob. Jacob had been turned into Israel, and Esau had been turned into forgiveness. As Jacob was remade, wrestling in the dust, evidently so was Esau. And what was in the past was in the past. Esau had forgiven his little brother. Who are these two people? Their mother, Rebecca, would have never recognized these two boys. And Jacob is offering all the stuff, and Esau says, no, I don't expect any of this. I have enough. I'm well taken care of. And Jacob insists. So they end up having this exchange of gifts. This is very common in that culture. In that culture, to not accept a gift from someone would be the greatest insult, right? Well, whatever happened with Esau? How did he have such a shift in his attitude towards Jacob? We're never told. We can meditate on that. And I have to wonder if somehow mysteriously, maybe it was really Esau and Jacob wrestling. Maybe God wrestled with Jacob, and at the same time he wrestled with Esau. Maybe somehow mystically they wrestled with each other through God, because both have been changed. Both have been both have been remade. So this is so real. Jacob is told by his brother Esau that Esau is going to go down south. He's going to get things ready, and for Jacob and his family to come and visit with them, and we're going to build some booths for you, and this is going to be delightful. You can come stay with us. And it seems like Jacob, once again, he says, yes, I'll be following. I'll be right behind you. And Jacob, once again, is deceitful. Jacob does not go south. He never goes down to his brother's land. He completely dismisses it, ignores the invitation, doesn't show up, and pitches his tent in a return back to Bethel. And he erected an altar. We'll talk about the name of that altar next time and the name of these places. And what this is showing us is that Jacob is not just purely good. And Jacob is not just purely bad. We see a pattern of reality, that Jacob has some good in him and Jacob has some not so good in him. What we're looking at is a person who is changing, a person who is growing, a person who is developing. What we see in this scene is that Jacob is so real. So often we hear the conversion story of the guy who's in jail and on drugs and about to lose his life, and he meets Jesus and turns everything around, and he walks away in bliss forever. And the story's over. Well, that's not reality. We don't very often hear the story of the guy where part of him is saved. Part of him can't let go of sin. Part of him is brutal. Part of him is teary-eyed and soft. Some days he knocks it out of the park. Some days he bunts and fouls. And some days he's not even off the bench. Jacob is real, and we see both sides of him in this amazing scene. Wasn't this awesome? This is a central plank in all of the Bible, and it's pretty much in the center, a little bit off the center, in the whole book of Genesis. So hang on, there's lots more to come, lots more adventure, and lots more character development with Jacob and his sons. God bless. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for walking with us through this study of the book of Genesis.